general, it's just, let's talk about the beginning of this dynamic, the part most people overlook, because honestly, it's so subtle. It sneaks up on you. The relationship between a narcissist and an empath doesn't start with abuse, manipulation, or control. It starts with admiration. It starts with deep connection, or at least what feels like one. And for the empath, someone who sees and feels deeply, that's not just appealing, it's magnetic. You see, empaths are wired to connect. They feel other people's emotions almost as if they were their own. They absorb pain, confusion, joy, and sadness like sponges. They're natural healers, often drawn to people who are emotionally wounded or unstable. And narcissists, they are experts at appearing wounded. At first glance, a narcissist may look like someone who's misunderstood, someone who's been hurt deeply and just needs a little more love, a little more patience, a little more empathy. It's not an accident. That's the hook. In the early stages, the narcissist mirrors the empath. They reflect their values, their dreams, their woods, their hopes. In general, it's just, if you've met, feels like one who finally gets you. And that's not just emotionally rewarding. It's spiritually validating. It's what psychologists call love bombing. But it's more than just excessive affectionate. It's the perfect illusion of intimacy and compatibility designed to create dependency. The empath, fueled by a deep desire to connect and understand, leans in. They give more love, more attention, more second chances. And for a while, it works. The narcissist plays the role, mimics the emotions, tells the right stories. But eventually, the mask slips because narcissists aren't wired for mutuality. They're not seeking connection. They're seeking control. Their love is transactional. Their attention is conditional. Their charm, it's a tool, not a trait. Here's where it gets dark. The emp doesn't leave when things start to feel off. They stay. Why? Because they believe they can help. They see the pain underneath the narcissist's cruelty. They make excuses. They're just scared. They didn't mean it. If I can just love them enough, it's just, they'll change. This is where the manipulation deepens. The narcissist starts testing boundaries, slowly undermining the empath's confidence, gaslighting their perceptions. In general, it's just isolating them from sources of strength. It's not obvious at first. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And let's be real, this isn't just a relationship issue. This is psychological warfare dressed up as romance, family loyalty, or even friendship. The narcissist doesn't just want affection. They want dominance. They want to be the sun in your solar system. Everything revolves around them or it breaks. And the empath, who once felt powerful in their capacity to love, begins to shrink. They second guess themselves. They walk on eggshells. It's just, they confuse survival with devotion. What's tragic is that empaths often pride themselves on their strength, on their ability to endure, to forgive, to hold space for someone else's suffering. But with a narcissist, that strength becomes a liability. It's weaponized. The narcissist feeds off it, twists it, and uses it to keep the empath trapped in a cycle of hope and harm. It's not a fair fight. It's an emotional siphoning masked as a connection. But here's the key point, the one we all need to sit with. The empath isn't weak. In fact, in general, it's just, they're often some of the strongest people you'll ever meet. Their downfall isn't their sensitivity. It's their loyalty to potential. They fall in love with the possibility of who the narcissist could be instead of recognizing the reality of who they are. And that's not naivety. It's trauma wisdom. It's what happens when you've been conditioned to see chaos as love. The dynamic between a narcissist and an empath is powerful, but it's not balanced. It's not built on truth, mutual growth, or shared values. It's built on illusion, dependency, and control. And until the empath sees that clearly, they remain vulnerable to the cycle. But once they do, once they see the manipulation, name it, it thinks, I stop engaging, the entire dynamic collapses, the narcissist loses their grip, and the empath begins to rise. Let me leave you with this. The most dangerous person to a narcissist is not someone who exposes them or fights them. It's someone who no longer believes in their illusion. Once the empath sees clearly, the narcissist power disappears. Now let's get into the moment everything starts to shift, the empath's awakening. This is where the story begins to flip. Not suddenly, but gradual, like a fog lifting after a long, confusing night. It's in jug. And that fog, it's years of gaslighting, emotional bait and switch, guilt, tripping, and silent punishment. The empath begins to question things not because someone tells them the truth, but because something deep inside no longer accepts the lie. It usually starts small, a moment of emotional clarity. Maybe the narcissist explodes over something meaningless, and instead of shrinking or fixing it, the empath pauses and thinks, wait, that wasn't me. That wasn't fair. That single moment of doubt, it's just a reflection of seeing through the manipulation. It's tiny, but it's revolutionary. It plants a seed of awareness. And once awareness is planted, it doesn't go away. It grows. What's important to understand is that this awakening isn't loud. It's not a dramatic confrontation or a final straw kind of thing. Not at first. It's quiet, internal. It's the empath sitting alone after another emotional roller coaster and finally thinking, I feel exhausted all the time. I don't feel like myself anymore. I'm constantly anxious and I don't know why. And when they start putting those pieces together, they begin to realize they're not in a relationship, but they're in a trap disguised as love. The pain of this awakening runs deep because empaths don't just wake up to who the narcissist really is. They also wake up to who they've become while trying to survive it. They see how much of themselves they gave away just to keep the peace. They see how much they've dimmed their light, how many boundaries they've crossed, their own boundaries just to avoid conflict. That realization can break your heart. But it's also the moment you start getting it back. And here's the kicker. This is where the danger starts for the narcissist, because once the empath starts seeing clearly, the game no longer works. I think general is the manipulation loses its magic. The tricks become obvious as emotional highs and lows that used to hook them start feeling like poison. The narcissist's greatest weapon was the empath's self-doubt. And now that doubt is being replayed discernment. Philosophically, this is the beginning of individuation, the process Carl Jung described as becoming your true self. The empath stops identifying as a savior or a fixer or a caretaker and starts reclaiming their identity as a whole sovereign human being. They stop trying to decode the narcissist's moods and start asking better questions. What do I want? What do I need? What do I deserve? It's a spiritual shift, and narcissists can sense it. They feel that energy changing and they panic. They ramp up the guilt, the love bombing, the fake apologies, the threats, anything to pull the empath into the old pattern. But here's where the real power shows up. When the empath doesn't take the bait, when they respond with silence instead of explanation, when they prioritize peace over the illusion of connection. That's not just healing. That's revolution, because once the empath is awake, the narcissist's entire system of control starts to collapse. Narcissists don't function well without emotional supply. They need reactions, attention, and emotional engagement like oxygen. And the moment the empath stops playing the emotional chess game, the narcissist is left scrambling for moves they no longer have. This is when they'll start accusing you of being cold, selfish, or crazy. That's not insight. It's projection. And it's a sign that your clarity is finally working. But make no mistake, awakening doesn't mean you're done hurting. There's grief here. You grieve the time you lost, the version of yourself you abandoned. The love you hope was real. Even that grief is sacred because it means you're finally telling yourself the truth. And that truth is what will set you free. So here's the reflection I want to leave you with the moment an empath stops asking what's wrong with them and starts asking, I think just why did I allow this for so long? That's the beginning of the end for the narcissist and the beginning of something far greater for the empath. So now that the empath is awake, fully, painfully, beautifully awake, everything changes. And here's the part that really throws the narcissist off balance. The empath doesn't explode. They don't seek revenge. They don't scream, threaten, or burn everything down. They just stop emotionally, mentally, spiritually. They detach quietly, completely. And for a narcissist, that's terrifying. Let's break down why this is such a threat. Narcissists don't just crave attention. They depend on it. Their entire self-image is built on external validation. They need to be admired, feared, envied, or pitied. It doesn't matter which. What matters is that they are relevant. And empaths, they're like an emotional battery. When they're invested in someone, they radiate care, curiosity, depth. Their emotional presence is strong and sustaining. It's the exact fuel narcissists feed on. But once an empath is done, truly done, that supply vanishes. And here's what makes them dangerous. They don't make a scene. They just start reclaiming themselves piece by piece. They stop reacting to the narcissist's provocations. They stop justifying their boundaries. They stop explaining their feelings. And in that silence, the narcissist is left alone with something they can't tolerate themselves. Because underneath the mask, the narcissist is hollow. They've spent their entire life crafting a persona designed to hide their insecurity and shame. And when someone like an empath walks away, not in anger, but in clarity, it forces the narcissist to confront that emptiness. It's not just a rejection of their behavior. It's a rejection of the illusion they built around who they are. That cuts deeper than any insult ever could. Psychologically, this is where you see the narcissist begin to spiral. They'll escalate. They'll try to provoke you with drama, guilt, or charm. They'll suddenly remember your birthday, or send cryptic messages, or act nothing ever happened. Why? Because they're desperate to re-engage you, to reestablish control. But the empath no longer operates from the same emotional operating system. The game has changed. And this isn't about coldness. It's about boundaries. Before, the empath's compassion was wide open. It didn't have gates. It let everything in, believing that love could fix what pain had broken. But after awakening, that same compassion gets upgraded with discernment. It stops trying to heal those who exploit it. It stops trying to convince people to value what they consistently violate. That shift isn't just emotional, it's existential. There's a deep philosophical principle at play here. It's the idea that withdrawing your energy from something is the most powerful statement you can make. We're taught to believe that power is about confrontation, standing up, speaking out, calling people out. And yes, that has its place. But in the narcissist-empath dynamic, the real power is in disengagement. It's in the refusal to participate in your own dehumanization. Think about it like this. The narcissist builds a house of mirrors and invites you to live inside it. Every time you question yourself, every time you try to prove your worth, every time you walk back a boundary, they win. But the moment you step outside that house and realize it was never real to begin with, they lose completely. the illusion crumbles, the reflection disappears, and they're left with nothing but the reality they've spent their life avoiding.
Yeah.
That's why the empath who's done is the most dangerous person a narcissist can encounter. Not because they threaten the narcissist's life, but because they threaten their illusion. They hold up a mirror that doesn't flatter, doesn't excuse, doesn't feed. And they do it without anger, just clarity. That's the kind of power that doesn't need to shout. It just is. And look, this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes grief. It takes therapy, reflection, rebuilding. But it's real. It's possible. And once it happens, the empath doesn't go back. They don't fall for the same tricks. They don't mistake pain for passion. They've learned the difference between connection and control. So here's what I want you to take with you when the empath stops dancing, the music stops playing. And the narcissist, they're left in the silence they can't fill. The empath's greatest revenge isn't rage, it's release. And that kind of freedom isn't just dangerous to a narcissist, it's unstoppable. When an empath reaches the point of being done, one of the first and most profound shifts they make is this: they stop negotiating with reality. They stop hoping for the narcissist to change. They stop explaining, defending, rationalizing, or trying to find the right words to fix something that was never meant to be fixed. Instead, they do something the narcissist never expected. They set boundaries, not the kind that bend when pushed, but real ones, solid, immovable, non-negotiable. And here's the thing about boundaries. To someone healthy, they're a sign of respect. To a narcissist, they're a threat. Because boundaries say, you don't get to decide who I am. You don't get to control how I feel. You don't get access to me unless you treat me with respect. And the moment an empath installs those boundaries, the narcissist's entire strategy starts to fall apart. See, it's just narcissists rely on emotional access. That's their currency. They don't want your love unless it can be weaponized. They don't want your time unless it's on their terms. And they definitely don't want your independence, because independence means unpredictability, and unpredictability means they're not in control. So when the empath stops picking up the phone, stops replying to the guilt-laced messages, stops engaging in circular arguments, what they're really doing is starving the narcissist to their power source. This is where no contact or low contact comes in, not as a punishment, but as protection. It's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming clarity. The empath has finally realized that peace isn't something that happens after the chaos stops. It's something you create by refusing to participate in the chaos at all, choosing silence over explanation, distance over debate, stillness over storm. Psychologically, this is a massive leap forward, because until now, the empath's nervous system has been trained to respond, to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to fix things. That's not weakness. That's survival conditioning. But boundaries break that cycle. They say, I am not responsible for your chaos. I am responsible for my own peace. That's a powerful shift from codependence to autonomy. And this isn't easy. Setting real boundaries can feel like betrayal, especially for someone wired for empathy. There's guilt. There's fear. There's grief. The narcissist might accuse them of being cold, unforgiving, even cruel. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. They are the expression of self-respect in action. And for the empath, they're not just a tool, they're a lifeline. Because let's be honest, without boundaries, the empath is endlessly pulled into the narcissist's orbit. And it doesn't matter how much healing work they've done or how self-aware they've become. If the door is still open, the cycle can restart. That's why no contact isn't just a strategy, it's a declaration. It says, I no longer choose to suffer for someone else's comfort. It's not about becoming hard or closed off. It's about becoming wise with your energy. Philosophically, this is about sovereignty. The idea that you belong to yourself, that your emotional real estate is yours to protect. The narcissist operates under the illusion that people exist to serve their needs. Boundaries shatter that illusion. They remind both parties that relationships are not about possession, they're about choice. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Once the empath sets those boundaries and holds them, not just once, but consistently, they start to feel something they haven't felt in a long time: self-trust. Because every time they say no and mean it, every time they don't reply, every time they prioritize their peace over their programming, they're telling themselves, I've got you. That's how real healing begins. Not in grand moments, but in quiet, consistent choices. And the narcissist, they'll try everything to knock those boundaries down. Rage, charm, guilt, shame, it's all part of the playbook. But none of it works on an empath who's rooted in their truth. Because once you felt the freedom of not explaining yourself, not engaging, not needing to be understood, you don't give that up. Not for anyone. So if you're in this stage or heading there, know this: the boundary isn't just a wall. It's a bridge back to yourself. And every time you enforce it, you're not pushing people away. You're pulling yourself home. Remember this: the boundary isn't what separates you from others. It's what separates you from your old self, the one who tolerated too much. And when you protect your peace like it's sacred, you become someone the narcissist can't reach, and someone you can finally trust. Once the empath enforces boundaries and fully steps into their power, something unexpected happens. They start to rebuild, but this time from a place of truth. And here's the part that completely changes the narrative. They don't just survive the aftermath of narcissistic abuse. They transform because of it. The pain that once consumed them becomes the fuel for clarity, growth, and purpose. This is where the narcissist's worst fear becomes reality. The empath no longer needs them, not even as a reference point. See, for so long, the narcissist was the center of the empath's emotional universe. Every decision, every feeling, every reaction orbited around the narcissist's moods, approval, and disapproval. That dynamic created a deep psychological dependency, even if it was disguised as love. But once the empath breaks that orbit, they begin to operate from an entirely different gravitational center, their own. And that's the real threat, because now the empath isn't just detached, they're self-directed. They start rediscovering who they are without the distortion of the narcissist's influence. Passions that were buried resurface, laughter comes back, peace becomes familiar again, and purpose, true purpose, starts to take shape, not as an escape from the past, but as a conscious creation of something better. This is where you see post-traumatic growth in action. It's a psychological concept that's often misunderstood. People think healing just means feeling better, okay? But post-traumatic growth goes deeper. It's when the pain forces you to evolve, when the breakdown becomes the breakthrough. The empath doesn't return to who they were before the narcissist. That version of them no longer exists. Instead, they become someone entirely new, someone forged in the fire of their own awakening. That kind of transformation doesn't just end the narcissist's control. It makes it irrelevant. The narcissist can no longer use the past as leverage because the empath no longer lives there. They've moved on, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And when someone no longer reacts, no longer engages, no longer remembers you as their source of identity, you lose all power over them. That's when the narcissist realizes the war is over and they didn't win. Let's bring this into philosophical focus. Think of Viktor Frankl's idea that between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space lies our freedom. The empath used to react instantly to the narcissist's provocations because their nervous system was trained to. But after the healing process begins, that space opens up. They become intentional, deliberate, grounded. They no longer operate from wounded impulse. They operate from conscious choice. This is where emotional alchemy comes in. The empath takes what was meant to destroy them and turns it into wisdom. They begin using what they've learned to help others. They spot manipulation quickly. They speak up without fear. And maybe most importantly, they trust themselves. That's the superpower the narcissist never wanted them to access. And it's not about becoming invulnerable or hard. In fact, it's the opposite. The empath becomes stronger because they've allowed themselves to feel deeply. But now they don't lose themselves in other people's pain. They know how to love without sacrificing their sanity. They know how to care without collapsing. They know how to listen without absorbing every wound. The narcissist, on the other hand, stays stuck. They don't grow because they refuse to look inward. They continue the same cycles with different people, always avoiding the one truth that would set them free, that the problem wasn't everyone else, it was them. Meanwhile, the empath evolves, and that evolution speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. So if you're on this journey, if you've hit that point where you're no longer trying to make sense of the narcissist, and instead you're trying to make sense of yourself, understand that you're on sacred ground. You're not just healing. You're becoming. Every boundary you hold, every silence you choose, every piece of your old self you let go of. It's all part of a transformation the narcissist will never understand because they never had the courage to face themselves. And here's the takeaway. The moment you start living for yourself, the narcissist becomes irrelevant, not because you hate them, but because they no longer define your story. And when your story becomes your own, your power becomes unstoppable. By the time the empath has reclaimed their identity, enforced their boundaries, and started living for themselves, something powerful begins to happen. Something the narcissist never accounted for. The empath becomes a mirror, but not the kind the narcissist can manipulate. This is a different kind of mirror, one that reflects not illusion, but truth. And it's that reflection, clear, grounded, and free. That becomes the narcissist's ultimate undoing. Let's be honest, narcissists live in performance mode. Everything they do is calculated to maintain the image. They carefully craft a persona that looks confident, successful, charming, desirable, but it's not real. It's a mask, and it works as long as the people around them keep buying it. That's why they target empaths in the first place, because empaths see potential. They offer endless understanding. They believe in who someone could be. And for a while, that belief fuels the narcissist's illusion. But when the empath is truly done, that belief is gone, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. The empath sees through the performance. They stop feeding the fantasy. And when they walk away emotionally detached and deeply self-aware, they reflect something back to the narcissist that they can't tolerate in reality. Here's what's fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Narcissists don't fear confrontation. They fear irrelevance. They fear being seen for who they really are without the mask. And when the empath no longer plays along, when they no longer respond with confusion or desperation or hope, they become a silent mirror. That silence becomes deafening. And the narcissist is forced to look what remains when the attention fades. when the performance fails, when the mask slips. That's where the unraveling begins. It's just because the empath is no longer emotionally invested, they become immune to manipulation. They don't respond to the guilt trips, the gaslighting, the triangulation. They see it all for what it is, just another act. And that detachment doesn't just protect the empath, it exposes the narcissist. Because now the narcissist isn't just losing control over one person, they're losing the ability to control the story. And for someone who lives and dies by perception, that's catastrophic. It's just, this is where the philosophical depth comes in when an empath who's healed reflects truth. They're not just holding up a mirror to the narcissist, they're holding one up to the world. They speak from experience, they teach from scars, not theory. And that kind of voice carries weight. It disrupts the narcissist's carefully curated reputation. It challenges the system that allowed the abuse to go unnoticed, creates ripple effects. You see this in real life when survivors share their stories, not as victims, but as victors. Their clarity becomes contagious. Their healing empowers others to see what they couldn't see before. And suddenly, the narcissist's power isn't just diminished, it's irrelevant. Because now people are paying attention to the truth, not the performance. That's the full circle moment. The empath who was once used, silenced, and broken becomes the one who breaks the cycle. Not just for themselves, but for others. They lead by example, not by argument. And in doing so, they reclaim something the narcissist will never touch: integrity. And it's not about revenge. It's about responsibility. Yeah. The empath realizes that healing isn't just personal, it's generational. Every time they tell the truth, hold a boundary, choose peace over chaos, they model a new way of being. They prove that you don't have to stay trapped in the roles other people assign you, that freedom is not just possible, it's necessary. So if you've reached this point in the journey, or you're headed there, understand this: your clarity is disruptive, your peace is powerful, and your truth, spoken or silent, has the potential to expose, to liberate, and to lead. Because at the end of the day, the most dangerous person to a narcissist isn't someone who fights them. It's someone who sees them clearly, refuses to engage, and lives well in spite of them. That's the kind of power that doesn't need to prove anything. It just is. And here's the final takeaway. When your healing becomes louder than their manipulation, you don't just win, you change the game.